There are places in the galaxy where even the cockiest alien species shut their mouths and look uncomfortable. The endless green on Thyros 2 was one of those places. A sprawling forest that had turned the most advanced civilizations into whimpering children for the past 3 centuries. Oh, they'd tried everything, naturally. The Centaurians sent their best military drones, 28 of them, each worth more than a small planet's GDP. Radio silence within minutes, not so much as a distress beep. The Ithakians, never ones to be outdone in the stupidity department, launched a full assault squadron, 36 ships, crews totaling nearly 400 of their finest warriors. They might as well have thrown credits into a black hole for all the good it did them. The Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, had slapped a 50 million credit bounty on anyone who could bring back even the most basic intel from inside that green nightmare. 300 years, 50 million credits. Not a single taker had returned to claim it. Well, not until Captain Tessa Hawthorne decided she needed the money. Thyros Station orbited the planet like a nervous tick. Close enough to monitor the surface, but far enough away to avoid whatever cosmic joke was playing out down there. The station buzzed with the usual collection of traders, bounty hunters, and bureaucrats, all of whom gave the observation deck's massive viewport a wide berth. Nobody liked staring at the endless green for too long. It had a way of staring back. Administrator Grex, a tall, angular Centaurian with the kind of nervous disposition that came from managing impossible situations, nearly choked on his morning stimulant when Tessa walked into his office. "You want a what?" he asked, his voice climbing several octaves. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sure sign of Centaurian distress. "File for expedition clearance to the Endless Green," Tessa repeated, sliding a datapad across his desk. She sat in the chair opposite him with the kind of casual confidence that made bureaucrats break out in hives. "Pretty straightforward paperwork, actually. I was expecting more hoops to jump through." Grex stared at the pad like it might explode. "Captain Hawthorne, I feel obligated to remind you that the mortality rate for expeditions to the Endless Green stands at 100%, yeah." Tessa shrugged. "I read the warnings. Quite a collection you've got there. Certain death, cosmic horror beyond comprehension. Don't even think about it unless you want your atoms scattered across dimensions. Really cheerful stuff." The office door chimed, and in walked Brax, 2 meters of muscle, scales, and bad attitude, wrapped in the kind of armor that cost more than most ships. The Ithakians were the galaxy's self-appointed tough guys, and Brax wore the title like a crown. "Well, well," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "The infamous Captain Hawthorne. Heard you were scraping the bottom of the barrel for work these days." His laugh sounded like a rock slide. "Don't tell me you're actually considering the green?" Tessa glanced over her shoulder at him. "Considering? I just filed the paperwork." Brax's laugh died in his throat. He looked at Grex, who nodded miserably. "You've got to be joking," Brax said. "Human, I've seen what comes out of that place. Well, actually, nothing comes out of that place, which is exactly my point. My own clan sent a strike team down there 15 cycles ago. Best warriors we had. You know what we found? Let me guess. Nothing? Worse than nothing. We found their gear scattered around the perimeter like confetti, clean as surgical cuts. Whatever's down there doesn't just kill you, it plays with you first." Tessa turned back to Grex. "So, about that clearance." "Captain," Grex said, leaning forward with the desperate look of someone trying to talk a friend out of jumping off a cliff. "Perhaps we could discuss alternative employment opportunities. The Galactic Survey needs experienced pilots for mapping runs. Much safer, steady pay." "Steady pay doesn't cover my ship's maintenance costs," Tessa interrupted, "or my crew's medical bills, or the little matter of keeping everyone fed." She tapped the datapad. 50 million credits, though? That covers a lot of problems." Brax snorted. "Credits don't spend well when you're dead, human." "True," Tessa agreed. "But they spend even worse when you're broke and alive." She had a point, and they all knew it. The galaxy was an expensive place to live, especially for independent operators who didn't have the luxury of government backing or corporate sponsorship. Freelance captains like Tessa lived job to job, always one repair bill away from losing everything. But still, the endless green. What makes you think you can succeed where entire fleets have failed? Grex asked. Tessa considered the question seriously. It was a fair one after all. What did make her think she could walk into a place that had devoured every expedition for 3 centuries and somehow walk back out? Maybe I can't, she said finally. But here's the thing. Every expedition that's gone down there has been a military operation. Ships, weapons, enough firepower to level a small moon. Big, loud, aggressive approaches. And you're suggesting... I'm suggesting maybe the forest doesn't like being invaded. Tessa stood up, straightening her jacket. Maybe it's time someone tried asking nicely instead of kicking down the door. Brax burst into laughter. The kind of laugh that echoed off the walls and made small objects rattle. Asking nicely? Human, you really are insane. What are you going to do? Knock politely on a tree trunk and introduce yourself? Something like that. The laughter stopped. Brax stared at her, trying to figure out if she was serious. Grex just looked increasingly distressed, all 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. Captain Hawthorne, Grex said carefully, I must advise you that Galactic Council regulations require me to inform you that this expedition has a projected survival probability of 0.0%. Furthermore, rescue operations will not be attempted, as they would only result in additional casualties. Do you understand these terms? Crystal clear, Grex sighed. A sound like air escaping from a deflating balloon. Very well. Your clearance is approved, though I suspect I'll regret this decision for the rest of my career. He paused. How long should we wait before declaring you officially missing? Tessa thought about it. Give me 10 days. If I'm not back by then, you can assume the worst and start the paperwork. 10 days, Brax repeated, shaking his massive head. Human optimism never ceases to amaze me. You'll be lucky to last 10 minutes down there. We'll see. As Tessa headed for the door, Grex called after her. Captain? What equipment will you be taking? Military gear, scientific instruments? Surely you'll want some kind of protection. She paused at the threshold, one hand on the door frame. Actually, I was thinking of stopping by the station supply depot. Pick up some basic camping gear, maybe a marking kit. A marking kit? Grex's voice cracked slightly. You know, paint, brushes, that sort of thing. For marking trees. She left them sitting there, staring after her with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching someone voluntarily stick their hand in a plasma conduit. Behind her, she could hear Brax muttering to Grex about crazy humans and death wishes. The Centaurian was probably already composing her obituary in his head, calculating how long to wait before cleaning out her docking bay. But Tessa wasn't thinking about obituaries. She was thinking about patterns, about the way every failed expedition had approached the endless green like a problem to be solved through force. Military formations, heavy weapons, the kind of overwhelming firepower that worked against conventional enemies. The thing was, the endless green didn't sound like a conventional enemy. It sounded like something else entirely. Something that maybe, just maybe, had been waiting 300 years for someone to try a different approach. Something that might respond better to respect than to violence. Of course, she could be completely wrong, in which case, Brax would get to enjoy being right for all of 10 seconds before her failure proved his point about human stupidity. But that was a chance she was willing to take. After all, 50 million credits bought a lot of chances. The shuttle ride down to Theros 2's surface was about as thrilling as watching paint dry, which, considering Tessa's cargo manifest, was oddly appropriate. Her entire expedition kit fit in a single duffel bag. Basic camping supplies, water purification tablets, emergency rations, and her pride and joy. A marking kit complete with biodegradable paint in 6 bright colors. The kind of gear a weekend hiker might take to mark trail routes. Not exactly what you'd expect from someone attempting to solve the galaxy's greatest mystery. The shuttle pilot, a nervous Centaurian named Heck, kept glancing back at her through the cockpit door. "Captain, are you absolutely certain about the drop coordinates? I mean, we could set you down a few kilometers from the perimeter. Give you time to reconsider. Right at the edge, Heck. Close as you can get without actually landing in the trees. But, Captain, the closer I start, the more time I save walking." Tessa checked her gear one last time. Besides, if this thing is as dangerous as everyone says, an extra few kilometers won't make much difference. Heck's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "You humans have a very strange relationship with self-preservation. We prefer to think of it as optimism." The shuttle touched down in a clearing maybe 30 meters from the forest's edge, and Tessa got her first real look at the endless green. It was underwhelming, honestly. Just trees. Lots of trees, granted, and they were tall, maybe 50 meters on average, but they looked like perfectly ordinary trees. Green leaves, brown trunks, the occasional bird flitting between branches. If this was cosmic horror, it had a serious public relations problem. "I'll wait here for 60 minutes, Heck called as she shouldered her pack. "Standard procedure, after that. After that, you head home and tell Grex I made it to the starting line." Tessa gave him a thumbs up, a human gesture that most species found either confusing or mildly threatening. "Thanks for the ride." She walked toward the tree line, and the first weird thing happened before she'd taken 10 steps. The birdsong stopped. Not gradually, not one bird at a time, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was so complete, it made her ears ring. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Behind her, she heard the shuttle's engines spinning up. Heck wasn't wasting any time getting out of there. Smart man. Tessa reached the first tree, a massive specimen with bark like wrinkled leather, and pulled out her marking kit. She selected bright yellow paint and carefully drew a simple arrow pointing back toward the clearing, along with the number 1. "Well," she said to the tree, "here goes nothing." She stepped across the threshold into the endless green. The second weird thing happened immediately. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, despite the fact that the sun was still shining overhead. The light took on a greenish tint, filtered through leaves that seemed somehow denser than they'd appeared from outside. But the really unsettling part was the silence. No insects, no rustling leaves, no animal sounds of any kind. Just her footsteps on the forest floor and the sound of her own breathing. Tessa marked the second tree with a yellow arrow and the number 2, then kept walking. By the 10th tree, she was starting to understand why previous expeditions had gotten lost. The forest floor was uneven, full of hidden roots and sudden dips. The trees grew so close together in places that she had to squeeze between them, losing sight of her previous markers. Worse, the light was getting dimmer even though it was still midday. By the 20th tree, things got genuinely strange. She was walking uphill, definitely uphill, she could feel it in her calves, when she suddenly found herself at the bottom of a valley she hadn't seen coming. Not possible, unless the ground had somehow shifted beneath her feet. Tessa marked tree number 21, then stopped to think. "Okay," she said aloud, because the silence was starting to get to her. "Either I'm losing my mind, or this place doesn't follow normal rules of physics." A rational person might have turned back at that point. Tessa pulled out her compass, checked her bearing, and kept walking. Tree number 32 was when she found the bones. They were scattered around the base of an enormous oak-like tree, bleached white by time and weather. Human bones, by the look of them, though it was hard to tell for sure. Whatever had killed their former owner had been thorough. The bones were completely clean, with no trace of flesh or clothing. But here was the interesting part. They were arranged in a rough circle around the tree, too neat to be random. Someone, or something, had placed them there deliberately. Tessa marked the tree with a red X instead of her usual arrow. Red for danger, yellow for direction. Simple system. She was examining the bones more closely when she heard the growling. Low, rumbling, coming from somewhere in the deeper shadows between the trees. Not quite animal, not quite machine. Something in between that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The rational thing would have been to run. Instead, Tessa sat down cross-legged next to the bone circle and waited. The growling got closer. Branches rustled without any wind to move them. Something large was moving through the forest, keeping to the shadows but definitely heading her way. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said, addressing the forest in general. "Just passing through, trying to understand." The growling stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, the forest was dead silent again. Then, slowly, the normal sounds returned. Insects buzzing, leaves rustling, distant bird calls. Whatever had been stalking her was gone. Or at least, it was pretending to be gone. Tessa marked tree number 33 and kept walking. The next few hours were a master class in cosmic weirdness. She walked through a grove where the trees grew upside down, their roots reaching toward the sky. She crossed a stream that flowed uphill, defying gravity with cheerful indifference. She passed through a section where her shadow fell in the wrong direction, no matter which way she turned. Through it all, she kept marking trees. Yellow arrows pointing back the way she'd come, numbers counting her. Progress. Simple, methodical, boring. And slowly, she began to notice something interesting. The forest was watching her. Not in the sense of hidden eyes or lurking predators, though there were plenty of those, but in a deeper way. The trees themselves seemed aware of her presence. Branches would shift slightly as she passed, not enough to block her path, but enough to guide it. Roots would emerge from the ground to create stepping stones across muddy patches. It was subtle, almost too subtle to notice, but after marking 60 trees, the pattern was undeniable. The forest was helping her. Not much, and not obviously. Just little adjustments to make her journey easier. A fallen log across a deep ravine. A gap in the undergrowth exactly where she needed to change direction. Fresh water trickling from a rock face when her canteen ran low. By the time she reached tree number 85, Tessa was starting to form a theory. "You're not trying to kill people, are you?" she asked the forest. "You're trying to protect something." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in what almost sounded like a whisper. She found the first crashed ship at tree number 96. It was a Ythakian assault craft, sleek, deadly, and currently wrapped around a tree trunk like a piece of modern art. The hull was intact, but the cockpit was empty. No bodies, no blood, no sign of what had happened to the crew. But there were scratches on the inner walls, deep gouges that looked like claw marks, except they were too regular, too purposeful. More like writing. Tessa climbed into the cockpit for a closer look, and that's when she found them. More bones, arranged in the same circular pattern she'd seen before. But these weren't human bones. These were Ythakian, and they were much more recent. She was examining the claw marks when she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, definitely not human. Each step made a wet, squelching sound, like something heavy walking through mud. Tessa turned around slowly. The thing standing at the edge of the clearing was about 3 meters tall, vaguely humanoid, but covered in what looked like moss and bark. Its face, if you could call it a face, was a mass of twisted wood and glowing fungus. When it opened its mouth, she could see rows of thorn-like teeth. It was the kind of creature that usually appeared in nightmares or bad horror movies. It was also holding something in its massive, root-like hands, a marking brush. Yellow paint dripped from the bristles. "Well," Tessa said, trying to keep her voice steady, "that's unexpected." The creature tilted its head, studying her with eyes like burning coals. Then, slowly, it extended the brush toward her. An offering, or maybe a test. Tessa climbed down from the cockpit, moving carefully but not fearfully. She walked over to the creature and gently took the brush from its hands. "Thank you," she said. The creature made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been the whine through dead leaves. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing between the trees like smoke. Tessa looked at the brush, then at the crashed ship, then at the pattern of bones around the tree. "Okay," she said to the forest. "I think I'm starting to understand." She marked tree number 98 with a yellow arrow and kept walking deeper into the endless green. Behind her, the bones around the crashed ship began to glow with a soft, phosphorescent light. The forest was definitely trying to tell her something. The question was she smart enough to listen? Tree number 115 was where everything changed. Tessa had been walking for 6 hours, marking her path with the methodical precision of someone who really, really didn't want to get lost in a cosmic horror forest. The creatures, she'd started thinking of them as guardians, had been following her for the last hour, always just at the edge of her vision. Moss-covered, bark-skinned beings that moved like walking trees and watched her with those burning coal eyes. They weren't threatening exactly, more like curious. Every time she marked a tree, they'd gather around to examine her work, making soft rustling sounds that might have been communication. One of them had even brought her a fallen branch to use as a walking stick. It was all very civilized in a completely terrifying way. But tree 115? That's where she found the real secret of the endless green. It wasn't a tree at all. It was a door, carved into what looked like the largest oak in galactic history. A trunk easily 20 meters across, was an archway covered in symbols that definitely weren't from any known language. The symbols glowed with the same soft phosphorescence she'd seen on the bones, pulsing in a rhythm that almost matched her heartbeat. Almost. "Well," Tessa said, addressing the small crowd of guardians who had gathered to watch, "this is either the way forward or the way to become a very artistic corpse." The lead guardian, she'd started thinking of him as Groot, because sometimes you just had to name things to keep your sanity, stepped forward and placed one massive hand on the door. The symbols flared brighter, and the archway began to iris open like a camera shutter. Beyond was not more forest. Beyond was a vast underground chamber lit by bioluminescent fungi, stretching away into darkness. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but Tessa could make out what looked like architecture. Ancient, alien, and definitely not built by any species in the galactic database. "Okay," she said, pulling out her marking kit. "Let's see what happens when I ask permission instead of barging in." She approached the doorway slowly, holding up her brush like a peace offering. The guardians made those rustling sounds again. Definitely communication. She was sure of it now. Then Groot did something that made her heart skip a beat. He spoke. Not in words, exactly, but in her mind. A voice like wind through leaves, ancient and patient and infinitely sad. "You mark, but do not claim." Tessa nearly dropped her brush. "You can talk. We have always talked. Others do not listen." The mental voice carried images along with words. Flashes of previous expeditions, armed soldiers shooting first and asking questions never, ships bombing the forest from orbit. "They come with fire and metal. They take and burn and break. And I don't. You ask. You mark your path to find your way home, not to claim territory. You respect." Another guardian stepped forward, smaller than Groot, with delicate fern-like growths instead of moss. Her mental voice was younger, more curious. The Ancient One said some would come who understood, who saw without needing to possess. Ancient Ones. Instead of answering, they gestured toward the archway. Tessa looked into the glowing chamber, then back at the guardians. "Will you come with me?" "We cannot. We are bound to guard the entrance, but you." Groot's coal-fire eyes studied her carefully. "You may pass, if you truly understand." "Understand what?" "That some things are not meant to be conquered, only witnessed." Tessa marked the giant tree door with a bright blue circle, her first use of blue paint, reserved for something truly special, and stepped through the archway. The chamber beyond was breathtaking. The architecture was organic, grown rather than built, with sweeping curves that seemed to flow like frozen water. Walkways spiraled up through the space, connecting platforms that hung in midair with no visible support. Everything glowed with that soft bioluminescent light, creating an environment that was both alien and strangely welcoming. But it was the centerpiece that made Tessa's breath catch in her throat. In the middle of the chamber, suspended in a column of swirling energy, was a sphere about the size of her shuttle. Its surface was covered in the same symbols she'd seen on the door, but these were moving, shifting, and changing in patterns too complex to follow. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was definitely not something any known species had built. "Hello," said a voice behind her. Tessa spun around, hand instinctively going to the knife on her belt, then stopped. The figure standing on the walkway was humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall, graceful, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shift between blue and silver. Its face was angular, almost crystalline, with eyes like liquid starlight. "Please," the being said, raising what might have been hands in a peaceful gesture. "Do not be afraid. We have been waiting so long for someone like you." "Someone like me? Someone who comes in peace? Someone who marks their path not to claim it, but to find their way home." The being stepped closer, moving with fluid grace. "I am Keeper Yenth of the First Archive. We're the builders of this place. The Ancient Ones? That is what the Guardians call us, yes. Though we are not so ancient as all that." Yenth's expression might have been a smile. "Merely displaced." Tessa looked around the chamber again, seeing it with new eyes. "This isn't a tomb, is it? It's a refuge." "Very good. Yes, a refuge. When our star began to die, we sought a place to preserve our knowledge, our culture, our very essence. This world called to us, young, vibrant, full of life. We built our archive here and set the Guardians to protect it." "From what?" "From those who would take without understanding, who would claim without respecting, who would turn our sanctuary into a weapon or a commodity." Yenth gestured toward the floating sphere. "That contains the sum total of our civilization. Art, science, philosophy, history, everything we were, everything we learned, everything we hope to become." Tessa stared at the sphere, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she was seeing. An entire civilization preserved in digital amber. "How long have you been here?" "The archives were sealed 800 of your years ago. We have slept since then, waiting for someone worthy to find us." "And you think I'm worthy?" "You marked your path with respect, not possession. You listened to the Guardians instead of fighting them. You asked permission instead of taking by force." Yenth's crystalline features shifted into what was definitely a smile. "And most importantly, you came alone." That caught Tessa's attention. "Why is that important?" "Because an individual can choose to respect boundaries. Groups tend toward conquest. Military expeditions see only tactical objectives. Scientific surveys see only data to be extracted. Treasure hunters see only profit to be made. And I see—" "What do you see, Captain Hawthorne?" Tessa looked around the chamber again, at the impossible architecture, the floating sphere of knowledge, the gentle bioluminescent glow that made everything seem alive and peaceful. "I see something that should be protected," she said finally. "Something that belongs here, not in some museum or research facility or collector's vault." Yenth's smile grew brighter. "Yes, exactly. But that's not why I came here. I came for the bounty money. And yet, here you stand, understanding what others could not." Yenth moved to the chamber's edge, looking out over the vast space. "The Galactic Council's bounty was never about the money, Captain. It was about finding someone like you." "Wait, what? Did you think it was coincidence that the bounty remained unclaimed for 3 centuries? That no military force, no matter how advanced, could penetrate our defenses?" Yenth's laugh was like crystal chimes. "We have been selecting, Captain, testing, waiting for someone who would approach us with respect instead of force." Tessa felt her worldview reshuffling itself. "You've been Screening applicants? In a manner of speaking, the forest is not just our guardian, it is our judge. It reads intent, measures character, tests the hearts of those who enter. Most fail immediately. They come with weapons and anger and greed, and the forest sends them away. Sends them away how? Confusion, disorientation, fear. The forest creates a maze of the mind, turns them around until they flee back to the safety of their ships. The bones you found? Those belong to individuals who refused to leave, who pushed forward despite every warning. The forest was less gentle with them. And me. You came with paint and brushes instead of guns and grenades. You marked your path to find your way home, not to claim territory. You listened when the Guardians tried to communicate. Yenth's expression grew serious. You passed every test we could devise. Tessa sank down onto a nearby platform, her mind reeling. So what happens now? Do I get to take something back? Proof of what I found? You get to make a choice. What kind of choice? Yenth gestured toward the floating sphere. You can take a small portion of our knowledge back with you. Enough to prove your success, claim your bounty, satisfy the Galactic Council's curiosity. It would make you rich and famous, the woman who solved the mystery of the endless green. Or you can help us protect this place. Become our liaison with the outside galaxy. Ensure that our refuge remains a refuge, not a target for exploitation. Tessa looked up at the sphere of ancient knowledge, then at Yenth's hopeful expression. If I choose option 2, what happens to the bounty? Consider it payment for services rendered. The Galactic Council has already agreed to transfer the credits to your account upon proof of contact with the inhabitants of the Endless Green. They're in on this. The current council leadership, yes, not the military or corporate interests who would strip this place bare given the chance, but the diplomatic corps understands the value of discretion. Tessa stood up, pacing to the edge of the platform. Below, the chamber stretched away into bioluminescent infinity. And if I say no, if I just want to take my proof and go, then you take it and go, with our blessing. We would not force anyone to serve as guardian against their will. Yenth paused. But I do not think you will choose that path. Why not? Because you marked tree 115 with blue paint instead of yellow. Because you knew, even then, that you had found something worth protecting. Tessa looked down at her marking kit, at the blue brush still in her hand. She hadn't even realized she'd made that choice consciously. But Yenth was right. She had known. What would the job entail exactly? Liaison work, keeping curiosity seekers and treasure hunters away from the forest, ensuring that any legitimate researchers who do gain access understand the rules and respect the boundaries. Yenth's expression grew hopeful, and perhaps, eventually, helping us emerge from hiding, when the galaxy is ready to accept us, as we are, rather than as a resource to be exploited. Tessa thought about her ship, waiting in dock. Her crew, scattered across the station looking for work. Her debts, her responsibilities, her old life as a freelance captain scraping by on the margins of galactic society. Then she thought about the Guardians, patient and protective, waiting 8 centuries for someone who would listen. She thought about an entire civilization preserved in a sphere of light, trusting her to make the right choice. She thought about tree markings and respect, and the difference between taking and asking. All right, she said finally. I'm in. Yenth's smile could have lit up the entire chamber. Welcome to the archive, Captain Hawthorne. Let us show you the way home. 8 days after she'd walked into the Endless Green with nothing but camping gear and a marking kit, Captain Tessa Hawthorne walked back out again. The same trees that had seemed so ordinary on her way in now felt like old friends. She followed her yellow arrows in reverse order, each numbered tree marking another step toward home. Tree 96, where she'd found the crashed Ythakian ship. Tree 32, where she'd discovered the bone circles. Tree 21, where reality had first started bending in impossible ways. Behind her, invisible but present, The guardians followed at a respectful distance. They'd given her a gift before she left, a small crystal pendant that would mark her as a friend of the forest. Anyone wearing it could enter the endless green safely, though they'd still need to earn the right to reach the archive itself. The crystal also served another purpose. It was a beacon, allowing the Ancient Ones to monitor the outside galaxy through her experiences. A living, breathing intelligence network that would help them determine when the time was right to reveal themselves fully. But first, she had to convince the galaxy that she'd actually survived her impossible journey. Tessa reached tree number 1, where she'd started this whole adventure 8 days ago. The clearing beyond looked exactly the same. Same burnt grass where the shuttle had landed, same scorch marks from the engines. The only difference was the collection of beings waiting for her. Administrator Grex was there, pacing nervously and checking his chronometer every few seconds. Brax lounged against a survey vehicle, looking supremely confident in his prediction of her demise. 3 Centaurian security officers stood at attention nearby, probably there to recover whatever pieces of her they could find. And in the center of it all, a very expensive-looking recording drone hovered silently, documenting everything for the official records. The first to notice her was Grex. All 4 of his eyes went wide simultaneously, a sight that would have been funny under other circumstances. "Captain Hawthorne?" His voice cracked like a teenager hitting puberty. Is that really you?" "In the flesh," Tessa called, back, shouldering her pack as she walked across the clearing. "Miss me?" Brax's jaw literally dropped. The massive Yuthakian warrior, who'd been so confident in her failure, was now staring at her like she'd just violated several fundamental laws of physics, which, technically, she had. "Impossible," he rumbled, pushing himself away from the vehicle. "No one survives the endless green. No one." "Apparently, someone does." Tessa stopped a few meters away from the group, setting down her pack with deliberate casualness. "Though I have to say, the accommodations could use some work. 0 stars, would not recommend to anyone looking for a relaxing vacation." Grex's nervous laugh sounded like a small animal in distress. "Captain, we need to run a full medical scan. Debrief you immediately. Document everything." Sure, but first..." Tessa reached into her pack and pulled out a small recording device. "I think you'll want to see this." She activated the device, and a holographic display shimmered to life above it. The images were carefully curated, just enough to prove she'd made contact with something extraordinary, not enough to reveal the full scope of what she'd found. The hologram showed her standing in the chamber with Keeper Yenth, the 2 of them engaged in obviously peaceful conversation. It showed the guardians helping her navigate the forest. It showed the ancient architecture, the bioluminescent lighting, the obvious signs of advanced civilization. What it didn't show was the archive itself, or the true nature of what the Ancient Ones were protecting. Some secrets were worth keeping. "By the rings of Centaurus," Grex whispered, staring at the holographic display. "You actually made contact, peaceful contact. Turns out they're quite reasonable once you stop trying to shoot them," Tessa said. "Who would have thought?" Brax was still staring at her like she'd grown a second head. "How?" he demanded. "How did you succeed where entire fleets failed?" Tessa shrugged. "I asked nicely." "That's it? You asked nicely." "Well, that and I didn't bring any weapons. Apparently they have strong feelings about armed trespassers." She glanced meaningfully at Brax's collection of visible armaments. Can't imagine why. The security officers were whispering among themselves in rapid Centaurian, probably debating whether this was the most significant discovery in galactic history or an elaborate hoax. The recording drone circled closer, documenting every detail for posterior analysis. Grex stepped forward, his administrative instincts finally overriding his shock. "Captain, I need to ask, did they provide any technology, information, anything that might be of value to the Galactic Council?" "They did, actually." Tessa pulled out a small data crystal. one of several dozen that Yenth had provided. Cultural exchange protocols, languages, basic scientific principles, historical records. Nothing military, nothing that could be weaponized, just knowledge. She handed the crystal to Grex, who accepted it like he was handling a live explosive. This represents first contact with a completely unknown species, Captain. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've accomplished? I'm starting to get the picture, yeah. Brax finally found his voice again. What about the others? The expeditions that never returned? Are they? The ones who came in peace, who showed respect. They're fine. Living in the archive, studying and learning. Tessa's expression grew serious. The ones who came with conquest in mind. Well, let's just say the forest has a very effective immune system. That was technically true, even if it was missing a few key details. The Guardians had shown her the preserved remains of various expedition members. Not dead, exactly, but transformed. Integrated into the forest's ecosystem, their consciousness preserved in the living wood. A fate that was arguably worse than death, or arguably better, depending on your philosophical perspective. Some information was definitely need to know. So what happens now? Grex asked. Will they accept further diplomatic contact? Under the right circumstances, yes, but they have conditions. Tessa pulled out a datapad and scrolled through her notes. No military expeditions, no resource extraction, no attempts to claim territory or establish permanent settlements. Basically treat them like the galactic neighbors they are instead of a problem to be solved. And, in return, knowledge sharing, cultural exchange, access to historical records that predate most known civilizations. Tessa smiled. Plus, they're willing to serve as neutral mediators for interspecies disputes. Apparently, 8 centuries of isolation have given them some interesting perspectives on conflict resolution. Brax shook his massive head, still struggling to process what he was hearing. 8 centuries? They've been hiding in there for 8 centuries. Protecting something precious, Tessa corrected. There's a difference. The implications of her words were sinking in now. First contact with an ancient species. Access to pre-galactic historical records. A potential new ally with advanced knowledge and a neutral perspective on current politics. The kind of discovery that reshaped civilizations. And it had all started with a desperate captain looking for bounty money. Captain Hawthorne, Grex said formally, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you for your extraordinary service. The bounty payment will be transferred to your account immediately, along with a substantial bonus for successful diplomatic contact. Actually, Tessa said, holding up a hand, there's been a slight change of plans regarding that. Everyone stared at her. I'm taking the council up on their offer of alternative employment, permanent position as special diplomatic liaison to the Endless Green. The bounty money can cover my transition costs. Grex blinked all 4 eyes, in sequence. You want to stay? Someone needs to make sure the next expeditions don't screw this up. Besides, Tessa grinned, the commute is terrible, but the job security is fantastic. Brax burst into laughter. Genuine laughter this time, not the mocking kind from 8 days ago. You humans, he said, shaking his head. Absolutely insane, every one of you. We prefer creatively problem-solving, Tessa replied. Besides, someone has to keep you galaxy types from starting wars over who gets to study the pretty trees first. As they prepared to head back to the station, Grex fell into step beside her. Captain, can I ask you something? What was it really like in there? What made the difference? Tessa looked back at the tree line, where she could just make out the shadowy forms of Guardians watching their departure. Respect, she said simply. Turns out it's a universal language, even when you don't speak the local dialect. The recording drone captured everything. Her casual confidence, the proof of contact, the promise of ongoing diplomatic relations. Within hours, the footage would be transmitted across the galaxy, reshaping humanity's position in interstellar politics. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, Captain Tessa Hawthorne had walked into the galaxy's most feared location and walked back out with nothing more than paintbrushes and common sense. Tomorrow, she'd walk back in as Earth's first official ambassador to an alien civilization. Not bad for a week's work, even if the paperwork was going to be absolutely murder. 3 months later, the galaxy was still trying to figure out what the hell had happened. The Galactic Council's official reports were carefully worded masterpieces of diplomatic doublespeak, describing peaceful first contact and ongoing cultural exchange initiatives, without revealing just how monumentally stupid everyone had been for the past 3 centuries. The military brass, meanwhile, were having very quiet conversations about how their most advanced warfare tactics had been completely useless against an enemy that turned out to be, well, not an enemy at all. But it was the academic community that was having the real meltdown. Xenoarchaeologists were rewriting textbooks. Linguists were learning languages that predated galactic civilization. Philosophers were having heated debates about the ethics of assuming hostile intent based on incomplete data. And in the middle of it all, Captain Tessa Hawthorne had become the most unlikely celebrity in known space. She was currently sitting in her new office, a modest prefab structure at the edge of the endless green, reviewing applications from research teams who wanted access to the archive. The requests ranged from legitimate scientific inquiry to barely disguised treasure hunting, with a healthy dose of military reconnaissance thrown in for good measure. Most of them got rejected, not because the ancient ones were unwilling to share knowledge, but because most applicants still approached the situation like a problem to be solved rather than a relationship to be built. They wanted data downloads and technology transfers, not cultural exchange and mutual understanding. Humans, ironically, were among the worst offenders. Tessa's own species had reacted to the news of her success with characteristic enthusiasm, which is to say, they immediately started planning ways to monetize it. Corporate interests wanted exclusive access rights. Military planners wanted defensive technologies. Politicians wanted photo opportunities with alien dignitaries. None of them seemed to grasp the fundamental point. Respect wasn't a negotiating tactic. It was a prerequisite. But slowly, gradually, a few individuals were starting to understand. A Centaurian anthropologist named Keld had spent 2 weeks learning to paint trail markers before requesting entry. A young Yuthakian scholar called Thix had written a formal apology for her species' previous aggressive approaches. A human artist named Torres had submitted a proposal for a cultural exchange exhibition. Those applications got approved. Because the galaxy was finally learning what Tessa had figured out in that clearing 3 months ago. Sometimes the most revolutionary act you can perform is treating someone else with basic decency. Who would have thought that marking trees and asking permission could reshape interstellar diplomacy? Then again, humans had always been good at finding simple solutions to complicated problems, even when the rest of the galaxy was too busy being sophisticated to notice.